Sustaining Us is made possible by Fireheart Pictures and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for Sustaining Us here on KLCS PBS. I'm David Nazar. Are you far left, far right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican? Well, you all have something to say. No one on this program is demonized, silenced, or censored for simply having a different point of view. If you worship President Trump, great. If you say Biden is an amazing president, sure. If you say Republicans have the best ideas, okay. If you say Democrats are the better political party, no problem. Just make your case and tell me why. And that's what my next guests are about to do. Joining me are two California state senators, Democrat Senator Josh Newman and Republican Senator Scott Wilk. Senator Newman is the state Senate chair of the Education Committee. His 29th district represents parts of Orange County as well as some parts of Los Angeles and San Bernardino counties. Senator Scott Wilk is the vice chair of the Judiciary Committee. His 21st district represents Antelope Valley, Victor Valley, and most of the Santa Clarita Valley. Thank you both so much for being here for a common sense conversation.
Thanks,
Good to
David.
be here. Thanks for having us.
So, Senators, let's begin with a hot button issue, climate change, energy independence. Obviously, you know the program. We report, of course, on clean air, water, green energy, the environment, but it's a fair, it's an honest approach. Personally, I refuse to catastrophize every drop of rain, every drop of oil drilled, every car with a gasoline engine. Yes, we must be good stewards of the environment, but we also have to be good stewards of each other. Take into account possibly that folks are struggling all over to pay their bills, right? The meals, the medication, the mortgage, the rent, the energy, this all costs money. Senator Josh Newman, as a Democrat, some of your Democrat colleagues say the sky is falling due to climate change. I don't often hear them talking on the news about maybe acknowledging these personal struggles, Senator Newman, talking about just how much new green energy is going to cost, or the Green New Deal is going to maybe hurt the American taxpayer. Don't these things have to be considered when discussing climate change? Maybe not telling everybody, Senator Newman, the world is doomed in 12 years due to climate change, like some in your party claim, Senator Newman.
That's a little bit of a loaded question. Quick answer is yes. The quick answer is yes. So we in California, I think, can be very proud of our role in leadership around climate and environmental issues over time. But I think you're right. We have embarked upon a really ambitious course to decarbonize transportation, industry, homes, to address various environmental challenges. And it's important to your point, remember that not everybody participates equally, not everybody's affected equally. But I'd also add, I'm sure Scott would as well, that California is not in itself responsible for solving the world's problems. So we have to always, I think, be mindful of that fact. And your point's a good one, which is if you get too dramatic about it, you not only don't solve the problem, you can lose people in the process.
Senator Wilk, as you know, the left liberals argue your party, the Republicans, well, you folks minimize climate change and that you folks have to take this more seriously. So with that, what are you guys doing here in California to fight to keep the air clean, the water clean? Obviously recognizing, as I mentioned, possibly we don't need this doom and gloom climate change narrative, which in my opinion has been somewhat divisive and doesn't always provide that solution, Senator.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, one of the challenges we have as California Republicans is that we are tattooed by the national Republicans. And I will tell you, I think every single member of our caucus believes that climate change is happening and that a portion of that is man-made. I mean, even our most conservative Senator Grove from the Bakersfield area will tell you that climate change is happening. So I think what we want to do, as Josh had mentioned, we're the fourth largest economy in the world, yet we produce about 1% of all carbon emissions, and we should play our role. But there needs to be a return on investment on those dollars. And like we have this cap and trade program, and Jerry Brown funneled 25% off to go to the bullet train when we're not managing like our forest properly. I mean, back I think it was 2015, we saved like 1.5 million carbon tons through the cap and trade program, but wildfires generated 24 million. So we've got to do a better job in making those those investments smartly.
Senator Newman.
Scott's right. So one of the big problems we face is to his point, you got a bunch of sensible Republicans. On the other hand, we've got a much larger group of Democrats, but the bills we vote on aren't necessarily the average of the two, right? And so that's one of the problems we face, is finding better middle ground. Part of that, frankly, is because the numbers are such that Republicans don't have much by way of leverage. And on my side, again, we're very aspirational, often at the expense of the practical.
Senator Newman, talking about the practical, there's a lot of practical issues in California: homelessness, housing, transportation, crime, healthcare. On this program, we sort of term that all as sustainability issues, right? Things that affect our future, but also politics. I mean, you want to talk about something that affects our future? Politics. So talking politics, and oh gosh, I know I'm going to say the wrong thing. My heart's in the right place. I'm out on these stories interviewing the folks in the street, and they're saying there are too many no good, do nothing politicians in California who just like to spend our taxpayer money, and they don't get things done. Obviously, Senator Newman, the overwhelming majority, as you mentioned, in California is Democrat, your party in office. So your take on the political concerns of the people?
So that is a good question. So I want to make clear that we're talking about Democrats, but I'm not speaking for my Democratic colleagues. And so I don't disagree, right? My personal take, actually, what brought me to run for office in the first place was something very close to that. I think people deserve better, more accountable, kind of more honest. Honest means a bunch of things, but it's more forthright. And elected officials that will speak directly about the problems that face real people, and take ownership of either what we do or don't do. And so California is a massive state, and that brings it a whole host of challenges. But we certainly could do better by way of two things: the way we spend money, to Scott's point, not just tracking it, but make sure that we get the best return on that spending, but also keeping our constituents apprised and engaged so that they feel consulted. So properly served when we do these things, and quite often we try to do the right thing. We don't do that very well.
Senator Wilk, to be fair to the Dems, I'm not sure, to be honest. I know exactly what solutions you Republican folks are providing. Could Republican leaders in this blue state do things differently to help the California consumer with the issues we're talking about? In other words, do you folks have any kind of blueprint? Because honestly, for the average Californian, we hear y'all, but it seems like you're doing the same things that the Dems are doing.
Yeah. Well, so I say a couple of things. First of all, I want to start off by saying, in my view, we have three political parties in California. We got Republicans, Democrats, and progressives. Yeah. And the progressives are clearly in charge by the policy coming out of Sacramento. And that doesn't mean they're bad people. They're good people. I like them. They just have to be wrong on a lot of these policy initiatives. I will tell you, we've been proactive on the Republican side in terms of coming out with policy solutions. We had the California Promise last year. I was a Republican leader at the time, and me and a Republican leader from the Assembly, James Gallagher, we toured the state. We had a website. We did a lot of stuff. But because we have a smaller voice, we just don't get the coverage that I think we deserve. I mean, if you add up all the number of constituents that we represent, that's the same size as the state of New Jersey. New Jersey has 14 electoral votes. I think we should have a say in the governing process as well.
How do you get that voice back? How do you get Republicans?
Well, I'll tell you, so two strategies. First strategy is for Republicans to pick up more seats, but unfortunately, that is very problematic. Mainly because we're just out-resourced. We had a race in the Central Valley this year. An incumbent Democrat, they spent $6 million. The Republicans spent $1.6 million, and we lost by 18 votes.
13.
Oh, yeah, being 13. 13. Great, 13. Good for our team. So that's always been one of my tracks. The other, so I've now personally pivoted because I don't think that's going to get turned around. And I've always worked across the aisle, but really committed to doing that in my final years in the Senate. And Senator Newman and I are both co-chairs of the Problem Solver Caucus, which is both houses, both parties coming together to have real frank discussions, dive deeper into policy, and hopefully come out with some policy solutions that are alternatives to the extremes on both sides.
Senator Newman, I'm going to digress just a bit, talking about things that might or might not frustrate the California voter. You were recalled back in 2018 as a state senator. I'm going to let you explain why, how you got back in office, and then what is your opinion of all these recalls, which are seemingly constant in the state of California?
All right, I can tell you that recall frustrated at least one California voter, right? So, um, so why do we have so many recalls in California? So the answer actually isn't that different from what Scott was speaking to. So we have a state of almost 40 million people, but Democrats outnumber Republicans by a vast amount, particularly district by district. So as a result, in the Senate, using as an example, there's 32 Democrats who were elected. There's only 8 Republicans, right? So to Scott's point, those 8 Republicans represent a very large number of voters who, looking at kind of their own prospects for leverage, for input, realize they're kind of locked out. So there is a ton of really visceral anger among Republican voters, but I guess lots of people who don't feel heard or consulted or particularly well served by government. And so the tendency is to gravitate toward other options. And so because the recall, as it was originally developed or implemented in 1911, hasn't been updated to account for polarization, kind of modern campaign techniques, et cetera. It's an easy sort of tool to exploit to try and get out of politics what voters of different stripes, but especially those who feel locked out, can't get out of regular elections. That's really why recalls are so common, or attempted recalls are even more common, because people feel completely disenfranchised by the political process otherwise.
Okay, this is something we have to talk about, and I'm going to get your take and Senator Wilk's take, and whoever wants to jump in, fine. We're going to talk crime, and I've got to be honest with this. It's a disaster here in California. It's a disaster throughout the U.S. No matter what the Democrats say or how progressives blame, I mean, I'm listening to the news, they're blaming COVID still, or the progressives say, well, there's not such bad crime, it's just a political talking point to the Republicans. That incenses me. I'm livid because, listen, I'm not going to cite the LA Times or all these newspapers. I'm going to cite the police blotters of the LAPD. Just check out the police blotters every week in LA or throughout the country. Crime is not a political talking point, senators. Crime is increasing dramatically. We got violent crimes, homicides, home burglaries, whatever the case may be. And it's got to be a priority for both Democrat and Republican. Whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
I'll let Scott go first.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with you. Everywhere I go, people talk about crime. I remember I was out in Victorville. This had to have been pre-COVID. It must have been pre-COVID. I was speaking to this African-American lady who works at Best Buy, and she's there checking out this guy, and the guy goes, oh, how much are we up? All this stereo equipment stuff. How much are we up to? She goes, oh, it's about $750. She goes, thanks. And he starts running out with the cart. And now a lot of these stores, retailers, they don't want their employees to chase after, because one, they're concerned about, obviously their safety, as well as, potential, liability. So, I mean, I think, Prop 4757, well intended, and there's some aspects of both those propositions that should probably stay in place, but we definitely need to do some reforms there. I don't think you're going to see it in the legislative process, however, so that's something that we'd have to do as the people outside the building.
Senator
So
Newman.
let me give it a little context. So Scott mentioned, a guy running away with X amount of goods, right? So California did raise the threshold for the amount of the value that you could steal before it was considered something above a misdemeanor offense. So $950. And it is probably true. In fact, we know it's true that people who do bad things, like everybody else, they're rational actors. And so what you have systems behaving like systems will. So surprise, right? We have a lot more property crime. We have a lot more theft, especially at kind of the retail level, because people know exactly what the rules are, and they're going to push it right to the end. And so I'll speak for myself, but hopefully for other Democrats, we should be honest about that. We should be honest in California when we make changes to law that cause unintended systemic changes like this. We should be willing to go back and say, hey, maybe our initial sort of impulse was solid, the broader goals are good, but we have to account for these unintended consequences. If you don't do that, you're not serving the people who sent us here.
Well, actually, that effort was tried. It was our Democratic colleague, Assemblyman, had a bill to implement all those reforms. He's now the new sheriff of Sacramento County. And the problem we have, and this is something we need to change, is we need to take the politics out of writing the ballot statements. It's done by the Attorney General, which has a political slant, and it really should be shifted over to the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is nonpartisan. And I think it confused a lot of voters. I think they were in favor of those reforms, and it failed because they're misled by their own government by the way it's structured in the voter pamphlet.
So David, I'm sure you've talked about this at some point. So what Scott's talking about is when you get your ballot, when you get the sample ballot, there's a title and a summary of a proposition. The title can be very misleading, and the summary can be absolutely very confusing. And so at the end of the day, I think it's fair for voters to ask one really simple question: is like, how come we have to decide this stuff instead of the people we elect to do it?
Because we're not doing it.
Listen, that's a good point and another conversation for another day, but all these ballots and initiatives that we're voting on, lobbyists, special interests, fine print, you can't make heads or tails of what these are about. It's misleading. That entire process has to be fixed. We can leave that for another day. I'm not going to bloviate about that. The other problem in California, Senator Newman, will begin with you, homelessness. Listen, LA Mayor Karen Bass declared a homelessness state of emergency. What was it, when she took office back end of 2022? It was done before. It got nothing done. The city got what? LA got $1 billion over 10 years, $100 million for 10 years, whatever it was. What happened? The crisis got dramatically worse. It is insane. Join us in Los Angeles. You can't walk anywhere in Los Angeles without stepping over a homeless encampment. It's sad. You want to help these people, but something has to be done. When are politicians going to stop trying to fix this, senators? You all throw tons of money at the problem. Nothing gets done. I don't mean the two of you specifically, because to be honest, Senator Newman, you are doing something pretty unique in Orange County, California. Talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get Senator Wilk's take. Go ahead.
Okay, so and I've been fortunate to be on your show before. For this on this particular topic. So I have been successful over 5 years in securing funds that have been put to work in Orange County, the North part of Orange County, that have been used to create an 11-city partnership that is deliberate in how it aligns public safety across 11 different small cities, but also the community-based organizations working on different facets of homelessness. And the goal, and so far encouragingly, has been to actually create cooperation, a better focus, and better accountability among those organizations. So it's actually quite small compared to a place like LA, and deliberately so, right? So, so the kind of the question we were asking was, can you try a different approach and actually apply a different standard and see it work? And so far, I'm encouraged. I had the governor down to my city of Fullerton a couple of months ago to look at it. But it was always designed as a pilot project, right? Because to your point, you cannot solve these incredibly complex problems from the top down. And it's also true that from the local jurisdiction up, the problems are too big. So it has to be something else. And what we've tried in my public safety collaborative in Orange County is a different approach that is measurable and fully accountable. And we'll admit what doesn't work and try and not only apply what works, but hopefully use it for replication in other areas. And so we're about 5 years in. The real question is can we do that at the next level?
And I reported on some of that several months ago. You use technology, you use collaborations, you use police officers, you've got facilitators out there, you've got people in the street. It's a very unique thing. Why can't, Senator Newman, that sort of project be taken to a larger city like New York or somewhere, Los Angeles, New York, somewhere in the Bay Area, and try to combat homelessness at more of a grassroots, direct level?
So I think part of it, David, is we used the funds that I secured to force that collaboration. You don't get the money, you're not part of the program, right, unless you actively buy into this more deliberate, more collaborative model that actually, to your point, uses a software platform to make sure everybody's inputting data about the same people, and we can track everybody. And so where you get into kind of larger jurisdictions, you have so many more players. The state, like I said, is huge. And when something's too big, it's really hard to manage and track and assess and hold accountable. And so we really haven't learned that lesson. We keep trying new and different big ideas instead of getting back to basics.
Senator Wilk, any new ideas on homelessness?
Well, so a couple of things to address this. Number one, I had a bill last year, was going to introduce it this year, and I decided not to pull together all the data so we can do all those things that Josh was talking about. But there's so many entities involved and so much opposition to it that I decided I'm not going to move, because it's not going to go anywhere. But we actually need to have real data so we can have real measurements. But just going back to your original premise, back in 2017, I was able to get an audit approved by the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. Did two things. One, it looked at the way that LAHSA was distributing the funds throughout LA County, because I believed that my district was being shortchanged to the benefit of downtown LA. And when the audit was done, that was in fact true, and those inequities have been corrected. But number two, when I met with Elaine Howe, who was then the auditor, she goes, we're spending a lot of money, Scott, and we want to just see what best practices are, and so everybody can adopt those. I said, great. So we threw that in there and got approved. She calls me up when it was done. She goes, I need to meet with you in the morning. And she was horrified. She goes, there's no plan. There's no plan. And so I did a couple things in the plan. The year before, we had passed this Homeless Finance Council. I actually voted no on that because I thought it'd just be another layer of government, which it was, but it wasn't funded. So I did a member's request and I got that initial funding approved. Governor Brown put it in the budget. Then I took all of her recommendations that she had to lay out a plan, and I gutted a bill that was already in the assembly. I put all the policy in, cleared the policy committee, went to the appropriations committee, and Lorena Gonzalez, who was the chair of that committee, put it in her pocket, that's the only committee you can do that. You put it in her pocket. I ran it again the next year, and again, no votes in the Senate, no votes in the Assembly policy committee, and then she put it in her pocket again. Now, parts of that have been adopted since then, individually, but we do not have a comprehensive approach. And speaking of comprehensive approach, we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out overnight. I mean, I think we need to acknowledge that, and that it's going to take funding. And that's great that we have housing, but we have to couple it with wraparound services so these people get the treatment that they need. So if we have any hopes of mainstreaming them back into society, it's got to be a massive program.
It is a Herculean effort. We have a few minutes left, and here's something I would be remiss if we do not talk about, and I'm going to be honest, and I hope I don't offend either of you. People hate politicians. For that matter, they hate news reporters, and possibly deservedly so. But speaking about politicians, and we'll talk about reporters later, what can we do to sort of get the public more involved and have people be less cynical, you could say, about politics, about politicians? So it's kind of a me-we, right? It's a win-win. We're just all in this together. Newman, and then to Wilk.
So, yeah, it's a good question. So what can we do? So on the one hand, all of the reforms that we've made over the last X years, right, are ostensibly about achieving that goal, right? So term limits, contribution limits, all the various rules around how we do stuff. None of that stuff has worked. Campaigns get more and more expensive. Scott referred to it earlier just how expensive one Senate campaign was. And so what you have is a situation where people are really far removed from civic processes, right? So the average, the number of people who can name their elected official at the state level on an average basis is 11%. So that means 9 out of 10 I might think everybody loves me. To your point, a lot of people don't, but 9 out of 10 people don't even know, who Scott and I are. That's a really big issue, right? And there's lots of reasons for that. Even as people have every reason, I think, to be frustrated and over time become cynical. And so we need to lower the barriers to entry, but make it more feasible and more attractive for people to be more involved in their local processes. And then because we've got 40 million people in the state, we have 120 members of the legislature, 40 state senators, and 80 assembly people. And on the one hand, people will give me too much credit. They'll say, you're one of those 40. You must be really smart. On the other side, another kind of person hates us all, right? And there's somewhere in between is the kind of governance, the kind of public service that I think our founders had in mind. And we got to figure out how to get back to that.
Senator Wilk.
Yeah, well, I can only control what I can control, which is me, and I'm as cynical as everybody else, particularly when it comes to your profession, the media.
Yeah.
I don't trust anybody, and I came to that conclusion back in 2012. So it's very frustrating. But in terms of what I do, I mean, obviously, I'm a middle-aged white guy, Republican. I spend a lot of time going to classrooms and talking to students. I've been very involved in working with foster youth. One of every 3 foster youth in LA counties in my district. Go to African American churches, Hispanic organizations, because my district is 40% Latino, 13.5% African American. So go and share so they know that I'm a real person. I think too many people see us as 2-dimensional and not 3. And then I like to engage with my constituents. I take a little bit of time every month, and I will call people that have emailed in or whatever, complaining about something, and talk to them. It's really fun getting them on the phone because they act much different on the phone than they do in their email. And then if you write me a letter, I write you back because I want you to feel connected to your government. And that takes time, but I think it's a really important thing to do.
And let me add to that, because Scott's absolutely right and on the right track. So we're living in an age where the average person seems to know everything about the Kardashians, or if you're a dude, everything about fantasy sports, and very little about civics. And so education clearly is a part of that. I'm proud to be the new chair of the Senate Committee on Education. We have to get back to basics and educate not just kids but everybody about civics, and give them a reason to feel invested enough to participate. Otherwise, it's only natural they become cynical and disengaged.
California state senators, and also, yes, the media has got to change. The media, bad today, and I'm not going to be defensive of our industry. You've got to have more honest reporting, more fair reporting, and not direct a narrative. And I hope that in our industry we see that. We'll have a conversation about that on a future episode. Thank you, California State Senators Josh Newman and Scott Wilk, for really a great interview. I hope we can do this again.
Glad to. Look forward to it. Thanks.
Now, for more information about our program, just click on klcs.org and then click Contact Us to send us your questions, your comments, or story ideas so we can hear from you. Or contact me directly at David Nazar News on Twitter, or just go to David Nazar News on YouTube. Contact me there. We'll get back to you. And be sure to catch our program here on PBS, or catch us on the PBS app for all things sustainable. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Sustaining Us here on KLCS PBS. I'm David Nazar.